Welcome everyone to today's panel discussion on BC's creative tech ecosystem, a driver of growth and opportunity. My name's Tyler Farmer, and it is my pleasure to kick off today's event. If you're joining us today, you probably have noticed there's been a creative boom on Canada's western coast, and we're excited about the people who have brought together to discuss that. To kick off today, I'll be passing it shortly to ICTC's Chief Research Officer, Alexandra Kutin, who will briefly explain creative tech, our collaboration with DigiBC, the key areas of our work together. She'll then hand the baton off to DigiBC's Executive Director, who will talk about the key findings of our project, the recommendations come from it, and what's next for his organization. We'll then pleased to pull together and bring to the virtual stage our esteemed panelists for today, which you'll hear talk at about a quarter after. If you have any questions for them at any point, feel free to put it in the chat. We'll aggregate those and feed them to the panelists at the about hour and quarter marker. I'll then come back to wrap up today with you. We hope you enjoy this chat. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to tell us at any point in the chat, and we'll definitely stick those aside to feed to our panelists at an appropriate time. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to the virtual stage ICTC's Chief Research Officer, Alexandra Kutin.
Thanks so much, Tyler. Thank you, Tyler, and thanks everyone for joining today. As Tyler mentioned, I'm the Chief Research Officer at ICTC, and I'm really happy to be here today with a couple of our esteemed panel members and DigiBC to talk a little bit about a study that we did about a year ago now, but over the course of a full year, that looks at creative tech in BC. So BC, for many of those on the line who may not know, is actually the birthplace of creative tech in Canada. It's where it all started, and it's still one of the key drivers of creative tech across the country. So we'll get into some of those really interesting facts from the report today, and we'll have a great conversation with our panelists who each represent a core industry within creative tech that could talk to us a little bit more about how the sector is evolving, the talent pipeline, workforce diversity, and a number of other key issues. So thank you again for joining us today. I'll now hand over to the Executive Director of DigiBC, and he'll take us through a couple of the key findings and recommendations that came through our year-long study on creative tech in the province.
Hey, Locke, sorry to butt in for a second. Just want to note you're on mute.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Unmuted. Hello, I'm locked out, the Executive Director of DigiBC. I am going to share my screen here, Tyler, if you could put it up. And I'm going to jump right in and start off with our sizzle reel from DigiBC.
All right, here we go. Up high, down low. Pick it up fast, turn it down slow. This is a game changer. Are you ready? Are you ready for it? We're so ready for it. Are you ready? Are you ready for it? Are you ready? This is what we can wait for. Crazy girls, keep going. Ready, set, go. Let's go. 3, 2, 1, ready, set, go. Do it fast, do it slow. 3, 2, 1, ready, set, go. Ready, set, go. Yeah, can you feel that? Straight adrenaline. So electric, every time it begins. So, are you ready? Are you ready for it? We're so ready for it. Are you ready? Are you ready for it? We're so ready for it. Are
So thank you, everyone. I am going to continue to share my screen here. So in 2019, we did the first ever benchmarking study of the creative tech ecosystem, as Lexi mentioned. And I'm just going to point out a few key findings from the 160-page document that our teams collectively worked on. So first of all, the continuous demand for jobs. We've identified and benchmarked over 60 unique occupations, worked on updating knock codes for jobs, and this has been really useful in our work, working with government and the education sector. Lack of representation in the sector was another key takeaway. So in terms of demographic, women in creative, technical, and digital roles, the majority of studios reported only 20 to 25% representation. So animation reports 42%, VFX 18%, and games 17%. On Indigenous representations, it was a group targeted for inclusion, but studios are unsure where to look. Nearly 2/3 reported having no Indigenous employees, but there is a strong desire to engage with Indigenous groups moving forward. And then similar with people with disabilities and a lot of the other underrepresented groups. Another key takeaway, our talent is from BC or Canada for the most part. So in terms of the demographics, 90% of their talent is found locally or from Canada, and only 10% are hired internationally. Our top post-secondary schools for creative tech talent, no surprise to those of you in the industry, for junior talent, the VFSs and UBCs and Caplanos, BCIT and SFU. For artistic and creative talent, it's the private schools that dominate. And then for software engineering and programming, again, no surprise, UBC, BCIT, and SFU. And then a really interesting one for us that we'll get into as we get into the recommendations, work integrated learning. We know them as co-ops and internships. That 95% of our studios found work integrated learning programs to be very important. So, and I'm just going to move at a quick pace here. I know there's graphs up, but you all have access to the report if you want to dive into it in more detail. The other really interesting part for me here is that our studios report a conversion rate of 50% of full-time hires from WIL students, which is a really great metric. And WIL students help providing stronger soft skills, which is one of the key things we saw in the study. And then another key takeaway, there are retention challenges. There's a lot more in the report that gets to the details of the of our competition internationally and even within Canada, California, Montreal, France, etc. But these are some of the top factors that came out of it that I think are worth noting, that from salaries to the cost of living, for the variety of new projects, desire to change companies, and then the lack of talent, especially high skill or senior talent. Another key takeaway for us that is really something that we're just starting to explore more, regions are an opportunity for us. So from focus groups that we did with in Northern BC, or groups from Northern BC, Interior BC, and Vancouver Island, there was definitely a lot of interest at the student level, but not a lot of opportunities. so a shortage of educational opportunities. The changes from the pandemic to the nature of work, to the idea of remote work, is something that was just simmering when we did this study, and through further discussions we're having right now with government, it's becoming an opportunity for our sector. And then connectivity, of course, something we can't control, but there needs to be good connectivity in the regions, which also has been receiving investment both federally and provincially, and again, provides an opportunity for us to piggyback on. So recommendations. We issued 10 recommendations coming out of the report, or 9, and then I'm going to focus on the first 3 here. So you can go into this in more detail in the report, but the top 3 for us, so prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So this starts, and I'll get into this a little bit later, I think, when we get into the panel discussion, but our studios all face challenges in collecting data on current workforce demographics, and in turn, difficulties measuring the efficacy of EDI efforts. And our studios acknowledge this data gap and point to the insufficient or ineffective data collection at the studio level. And so there's 2 areas that we can focus on here: partnering with key organizations such as HR Tech Group, which I'll talk a bit about later, and also policy, creating EDI policies. The second recommendation that I want to focus on, and this is a key pillar for us, is the talent pipeline. So specifically focusing on post-secondary and industry collaboration. We have our what works with Will now, but we really think this is an important time for education to adapt, for the public school systems to become more agile and nimble and meet the needs of our industry. And with that, we recommended an increase in seats for our most in-demand jobs, from software engineers and programmers to artists and technical artists working in 3D and 2D animation programs. We are seeking more collaborative curriculum development with schools as well, and I'll get into a bit of what we're doing around that a little later. And then novel apprenticeships and co-op ideas. So we've done well with work integrated learning to date, but what can we do better? What can we do when we combine our equity, diversity, and inclusion goals with that? And then the third recommendation I wanted to point out was increased visibility for the sector. This is something that we've talked a lot about in our sector, that we need to promote what we do, explain what we do a lot better, and knowing that we are creating so many jobs, thousands of jobs a year. How do we become more part of the conversation with government, with other industry, and with the education sector? So those are the 3 key recommendations, and they in turn influenced the strategic plan for DigiBC. So as you can see here, everything we've discussed here has fed into the pillars for DigiBC's new strategic plan, focusing on job growth and company growth, focusing on the talent pipeline and the future of the talent pipeline from K to 12 and through university, and then prioritizing equity, diversity, and inclusion, and of course, building on our community with events like this. So with that, I just wanted to wrap this part up and hand it back to, I think, Lexi, right?
Yes, indeed. Thanks, Locke. Thanks for sharing a couple of the key takeaways from our study. And for those of you who are interested, you could always access that study. We have it available on our website, on the ICTC website, and on the DigiBC website. It is not for the faint of heart. It is relatively long, about 150 pages or more, but luckily filled with lots of really interesting pieces of data and graphics as well. Okay, so today, before we get into this panel, I of course want to introduce my very esteemed panelists who are joining us today from across BC, and we have one special guest joining us all the way from Sydney, Australia. So very early for her this morning, but very happy that she could make it today. I'll start with giving a brief shout out to Locke, who just delivered this presentation for you all today. Locke is the executive director of DigiBC, and for those who may not be aware, DigiBC is the creative tech association for BC, representing video games, animation, VFX, and XR. Locke also serves on the board of the Canadian Interactive Alliance, representing interactive digital media in Canada, and he's the board director for Story Money Impact, the producer of Good Pitch Vancouver. Next, over on Vancouver Island in Victoria, we have Tim. Tim is the CEO and co-founder of Kano. He's a Victoria-based independent developer of social and mobile games. Kano released several successful games on platforms like Facebook, now Meta, I suppose, iOS, Android, and they have a local, very loyal fan base of tens of millions of players worldwide. Joining us from Australia, so skipping over several continents and several time zones, is Sharon Taylor. Sharon is the Group Chief Operating Officer at Animal Logic Group. She's responsible for the leadership and management of the production and operation activities of all 3 locations that she oversees, which are Sydney, Australia, Vancouver, and Los Angeles, California. She'll be speaking about this in the panel discussion today, but she's a very strong proponent of inclusivity, and Sharon's committed to supporting initiatives that ensure equal representation in the digital realm, both on and off the screen. And last but certainly not least, in Vancouver, or I think Bowen Island today, perhaps, Jeff White is the Visual Effects Supervisor and Creative Director for ILM Vancouver. In 2018, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences honored Jeff with a Technical Achievement Award for his original design of ILM's procedural rigging system, Block Party. And this is really cool, at least I think so, and huge congrats, Jeff. But that same year, he also received an Oscar nomination for his visual effects work on Kong Skull Island. So welcome to all the panelists today. Thank you again for offering a bit of your time to talk about what really is the booming creative tech sector in BC. And before we get into a couple of more detailed or technical questions, I really want to start this panel off today with a bit of a personal question for you all. So as Locke alluded to a little bit in his presentation, there are tons of opportunities in creative tech, whether it's in BC and in the other clusters across Canada, but a lot of really unique and interesting jobs. In fact, in the study that we did together with Digi, we interviewed 49 studios, and those alone represented 10,000 jobs across the province at that time. So really significant economic and labor market impact. But what we found is that the sector also struggles a little bit with visibility. So put otherwise, many people aren't really even aware of what creative tech is, let alone all the different job opportunities within it. So to ask that personal question that I alluded to, I'd like to start this panel with all of you just providing a little bit of an overview of how you really found your footing and how you had this journey into creative tech. And why don't we start in no particular order with you, Jeff?
Sure. I grew up in New York, not the city, but the part where all the cows roam around. And I think, you know, as we were talking about with Northern BC, to me, the industry felt so far away. I loved everything with visual effects, but especially computer animation. I watched Reboot every Saturday morning, which I know is made right here in Vancouver. So my path in was to study cinema and photography in college and combine that with a minor in computer science. I'm a terrible programmer, but know just enough to kind of get around the applications that we use. And having that foundation in film studies was really beneficial in this industry. So I really feel like that combination of the artists that we're looking for in this industry come from all different backgrounds in sculpture, painting, traditional arts, production, of course, but having that foundation and understanding how to support the storytellers and the work that we're doing, it has been really fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. And thanks for a bit of that nuance in terms of where all the cows roam in New York.
There's a lot where I come from.
Fair enough. All right, Sharon, what about you? What was your pathway into creative tech?
I think for me, it was, honestly, I came in through a finance department role. I didn't set out with a clear objective to be in this industry. I was looking for a place where I could be myself, work with some amazing people, and do something fun along the way. And was fortunate enough to land with Animal Logic 16 years ago in an assistant accounting role. And honestly, the second I walked through the door, it was home to me. You know, we have an eclectic group of people, technologists, creatives, but also people just passionate about the industry, and a lot of our support departments that really, you know, enable all of this work to happen. So joining that team, it was just it was crazy group of people, all with just a passion for filmmaking and a passion for what we did. And we have a lot of fun along the way, and everybody sort of holds themselves to a high bar. And, you know, it's just a fantastic industry.
Awesome. Thanks, Sharon. And that's really cool to hear that you started from kind of a finance perspective. I think for many people that are joining us today, it's really interesting and probably quite reassuring to know that there's different pathways into creative tech. Awesome. And what about you, Tim, on the gaming side?
Yeah, sure. So I, like Jeff, I have a computer science background, but I'm a terrible developer. My team told me to stop programming as soon as they could. I actually got into the gaming space by founding Kano, the company that I run today, to create Facebook games, which at the time the wider gaming industry, mainly AAA, was laughing at. You know, what was appealing to us at the time was we were able to leverage our skills as web developers and leverage Facebook's platform and a free-to-play gaming business model to self-publish our game and reach a huge audience. So, you know, I think within a couple of weeks of releasing our first game, we had over 250,000 people playing it. And then, you know, fast forward today, those free-to-play social games followed that audience over to mobile, and now that represents, you know, the biggest subsector in gaming at, I think, $70 billion a year now. So, you know, I guess I'd say that yeah, it's meta now, but I guess the key takeaway is that the gaming industry changes very quickly, and sometimes even people within it don't know all the job opportunities that are available.
I would definitely echo that, and we'll pick your brain on that topic for a little bit more detail later on. And last but certainly not least, Locke, I know you've worn several different hats within creative tech and the film industry more broadly. So what's your experience? How did you end up where you are today?
It kind of happened in parallel with the internet. When the web happened, I worked at CBC when I was really young. And so I found myself all of a sudden building one of the first websites, starting to stream audio. Fast forward years later, at CBC, we started this thing called New Media, where we built UGC communities online, the early like MySpaces and YouTubes, and then we combined all of that and started creating digital magazines. And then in the last job I had before this, I was the co-founder of the NFB Digital Studio and NFB Interactive. And we kind of brought it all together with longer form storytelling, with filmmaking, with animation, and started creating interactive experimental works that were really trying to tell stories online in different ways. And then that led to the whole immersive, you know, the birth of VR and immersive in that time as well. So it was kind of a unmappable path that just, you know, happened to include all the things I love doing.
Well, that's really great when that works out that way, huh? So very much related to visibility, and kind of one of the key takeaways that Locke talked about within the study as one of the recommendations of how we can improve visibility of the sector. The study also found that ultimately there is a diversity gap within creative tech, much like there is for the broader tech sector overall. And Sharon, I know in addition to your Animal Logic hat, you also don a Women in Animation hat. And I believe several years ago, back in 2015, we have found that although 60% of animation students were women, less than a quarter or so were actually working within the industry. So can you tell us a little bit about why that might be, and maybe elaborate on WIA's 50-50 by 2025 goal?
I mean, I think the whys are, they're different for a lot of people. No two women are the same like anybody else. But, some trends that we see is, the dealing with motherhood and returning to the workforce. I think our industry, it's, we have a history of some long hours. We have some history of some, some challenging schedules and milestones for our productions, which I think the industry is starting to sort of shift and sort of understand how best to manage those projects and those deadlines, to make, to encourage more people to feel like that there is a work-life balance. As far as, people transitioning into the industry, there's many different reasons. A lot of women might go off and, take those skills and apply them elsewhere. And I think, as industry, we have the social responsibility to encourage and create an industry where everybody feels like they belong, not just women, anybody from an underrepresented group, underrepresented genders, Indigenous, cultural. And so our, at WEA, we try to help both develop talent, profile women. There's the creation of the talent database, so that industry has access to where those women are, how to access them, look at their, review their skill sets, and hopefully find more positions and actually go out and really target and encourage women to come and join their companies. It's a cultural change, I think, for a lot of our industries, the way the industry started. And, we do have the social responsibility to ensure that our films and our video games, they represent the world that we live in. And I think the only way to do that is to have people from relevant cultures and genders and all sorts of areas making that content and delivering it to the world. It's not seen through the lens of any other representation. And that's a lot of women. It's about, proponing with the industry, with change across both industry and government, partnering with everybody to try and change the culture.
Excellent. And you definitely alluded to this in my follow-up question, but and ultimately kind of about how to have better representation, not just from women, but various groups. As you saw in Locke's presentation, our study also found that when studios did know the representation of other underrepresented groups like Indigenous peoples or people with disabilities, for example, that representation was very low. So in terms of whether it's partnering with relevant organizations or government, how do you think that the sector, or even animation studios more specifically, can help to ensure that there's better representation of all groups within it?
It is about that visibility, I think, both of the industry as well as the roles that are available to people. And I think that starts with parents, it starts with government, it starts with partnering with those community organizations and trying to help people understand how these roles might be suitable for them. And then internally, working with our hiring managers, creating a different, making the makeup of our teams, understanding how different can be better. It's very easy, with as we know, there's a talent shortage. And I think for a lot of our teams, when we have an open position, the first thing that we do is we go to the person who was last in that role and go, are you available? Can you come and fill it? And if we continue down that pathway, it'll never look the same. So create opportunities, be very targeted about the people that we're hiring into those roles, and actually make the conscious decision to do something different. And creating those policies from all areas, both within our own companies, within our industry, and with our government policies, I think will really sort of push for change in the future.
Awesome, love it. And I think there's something to be said also about kind of looking at maybe areas that historically would not have been looked at. Could be different programs at a university that maybe aren't really technical or digital or artistic in nature, but might be able to fill a role.
Yeah,
Great.
absolutely.
Thanks, Sharon. And on the topic of kind of headcount, or really just who works in this industry, one of the $1 million question that we got asked many times throughout our study was ultimately how many people work in creative tech in BC. And it's a question that I would love to answer, but the issue is it can be quite difficult to estimate because of several different factors. And one of those is that ultimately the sector or various industries within it do have different project cycles that are a bit unique when we compare that to tech more broadly, or even other sectors. If we want to put it in other words, ultimately headcount in March might be very different at a VFX company than it is in June or September. So this is something you're very familiar with, Jeff, in the line of work that you do. So maybe just for the benefit of the audience, if you could explain what these project cycles are and why we can see such big fluctuations in headcount throughout the year.
Yeah, sure. I mean, to a degree, project-based work is sort of the foundation of how films are made. A script is written, everybody's hired, you shoot the film, you edit it, you go through post-production, and that's the process of creating them. I should start by saying that certainly within visual effects and animation, it's a little more balanced. We actually have a large body of talent that we maintain from show to show, and all studios do. And it's really critical in such a high-tech industry not to have your knowledge base turning over every show. So a good example, I was a project hire at ILM, and I'm here 20 years later. So you can obviously spend a lot of time at one studio. That said, project-based works for some people. It doesn't work for others. Every studio has a different approach to it. The one thing I'll say that's good about it is that artists and production folks get a chance to experience different facilities. And that's actually a good thing. I think everybody's got a really different approach to how they do the work. As Sharon said, this industry is all about the people that you work with in terms of what makes it amazing to be in. And so it's actually great to work at a few different industries to find the one that might fit you best. Not everybody wants to work at a big studio. Some really prefer the smaller studios where you have a lot more hands-on and responsibilities across multiple departments and aren't so specialized. So I think that that part of the industry can be seen as a good thing. On top of that, I think because we are project-based, we often have shows come in and we have more work than we have the people to do. So those hiring up cycles can be great opportunities for us to expand, but expand really focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, as Sharon was talking about in the studio.
Yeah, that's really great. I really like this. Go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things for me that makes BC really special is that there is such a large variety of different types of companies creating different content, and seeing talent move from one studio to the other, but staying within BC creates a really unique hub for everybody, and everybody's sort of plussing and learning from each other. And I think keeping that talent within our companies, even though we all sort of are pushing and pulling to try and find the best talent, it actually develops our talent a lot faster. The knowledge base of a lot of that work integrated learning that Locke was talking about, and the talent development over time, having that is so fortunate for a lot of the incoming new talent into the industry.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, definitely, I think it helps to create maybe more well-rounded employees overall that have tons of different experience in different areas, but also with different companies. But it's interesting from the perspective that although there's competition, obviously, between the different studios, there's also a lot of cooperation, it seems. Mm-hmm. So on that topic, Jeff, just knowing that there are benefits and drawbacks to project-based work or contract work, does that on its own, or does anything else make it quite challenging to hire talent when you need it? For example, in your ramp-up periods, you might be hiring hundreds. What does that look like?
No, absolutely. I think it's a huge challenge, and for anybody that's worked in this industry, you know that you are very much at the mercy of the way these projects develop. And sometimes you'll have something that seems like it's greenlit and it's a go, and all of a sudden it'll disappear, and you've got to scramble to reallocate all that resource to another project. So I think that schedule management is just, I mean, there's people just dedicated to that part of the industry. But I think as we look to those kind of ramp ups, we certainly recruit a lot from schools, and there's so many fantastic schools here, both public and private within BC that we reach out to. As Sharon said, I think we do reach out. You tend to reach out to people that have worked at the studio before. They're kind of a known quantity, and that's a good thing. But I think that also maybe means some lost opportunity in terms of finding some new folks to come in and bring different ideas in terms of how the work might be done. So we try and balance, like always, making sure that we're finding new talent with each of those opportunities to ramp up. It isn't the thing where everybody's busy at the same time and everybody's slow at the same time. I think all the companies have different focuses, so they have different project cycles, which tends to work out pretty well. But right now in particular, I think everybody's busy. There's been such an upswing in content development that it's a great time to be an artist looking for it, because there's lots of opportunities.
Well, that's really great to hear. Actually, just before this panel, I had a question from somebody who may have joined today, maybe not, but they were inquiring about whether or not there were job opportunities for animators, as their child was going to be in that sector soon enough. So you heard it here first. Lots of opportunities.
Yeah, I can't emphasize to parents enough. Like, they don't maybe always traditionally think of this industry for their kids, but if your kids have an aptitude in art or technology, definitely look here, because it's not only a great place to apply that, but it's a really fun industry to work in.
Yeah, absolutely seems that way. And one, we can kind of progress a little bit to talk about just some of the changes that we've seen over the last 18 months. So although we released this study relatively recently, we actually started it in January 2020. And as with all research, of course, we had a certain set of assumptions that we had in mind for how we would progress throughout the study and what we might find. And that very quickly changed very dramatically once COVID hit. One thing that we have seen over the last 18 months in looking at how sectors have evolved and industries have responded to the pandemic is that the digital economy overall has been extremely resilient and has actually thrived despite the pandemic. And one of the key industries in that saw a huge surge in demand was games. So Tim, if I could take this over to you now and just maybe have you relay what your experience was like running a gaming company that focuses on social games within the context of a pandemic where we saw just massive demand for that type of content.
Sure, yeah. So I think we started the pandemic like a lot of developers with a lot of fear and uncertainty. We were not a remote company prior to the pandemic, and then within a few days, we found ourselves as one. So there was a lot of changes kind of attached to that. I'd say overall, the pandemic was really great for social mobile gaming companies like ourselves, and we were very fortunate and feel very fortunate about that. We really saw minimal disruption to our business from the operating end, because all of our services were cloud-based. People just needed an internet connection and they could move and work from home pretty easily. And then, from the player side, we actually see a lot of growth as people were stuck home with nothing to really do. So they were looking for outlets, to socialize and see other people. So at Kano, our purpose as a company is to build meaningful connections through lasting social games. And that was really reinforced and validated for us, especially through the first few months, where we saw tons of messages from our community, from players, talking about how important our games were to even people's just mental health and getting through the day and staying sane through the lockdowns. So I think that was really great.
Awesome. And although your business wasn't really disrupted, if anything, I think there was just much more of it as a result of the pandemic. But was there anything that you noticed that might really change gaming going forward? So has the pandemic just surfaced any new trends or consumer needs that either didn't exist before, or maybe they did, but they weren't really that prevalent?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think from the consumer side, one thing that changed was tech literacy grew tremendously. People were forced to learn how to download and use apps, how to pay for things, and just even communicate better online. And those are skills and habits that I think are going to carry forward as things move back to normal. Work-wise, we were 100% in office and in Victoria before the pandemic, and then since then we've been able to hire remotely across the country, and we've also had people that were based in Victoria and team members that were able to relocate to smaller communities and work remotely during the time period. That was just better for their lives. So moving forward, I think we're going to continue to see. We ourselves are going to maintain an HQ in Victoria, But even for local folk, I think we're going to have a flexible and hybrid approach to accommodating our employees' lives. And I think we're going to see that from more studios, either having hybrid work environments or staying fully remote, and really building and working on building better work-life harmony around people's unique situations. Office space wise, I think that's going to also have to evolve as people start to move remote and have hybrid situations. You know, we just actually signed a new lease on a bigger office space, but with more team and breakout rooms. That's a departure from kind of the big open office that we've seen from so many tech companies in recent years, just because it enables better team collaboration and is less disruptive, you know, when teams are meeting with people online, you know, through video chats or whatever. So.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. And there's definitely, I think, should be something that people are really paying attention to in this study or in this panel, because actually one of the areas that we highlighted in the study when we talked to people outside of Vancouver was just, well, maybe this will bring new opportunities for us in these smaller cities, whether it be on the island, the interior, what have you. So great to see that you've not only expanded throughout BC, but actually across the country as a result of the new work from home situation. And if we could flip a little bit over looking at VFX and animation, maybe I'll ask you, Jeff and Sharon, what your experiences were like throughout the pandemic. So animation, another kind of industry within creative tech that definitely saw huge surges in demand, and I presume the need for talent as well. Well, whereas VFX was a little bit more negatively impacted, at least at first, with the shutdown of live action film. So I'll just ask each of you to kind of provide a brief synopsis of how your industry was impacted by the pandemic and how you've evolved as a result since. And we'll start with you, Sharon.
Oh, I mean, you know, early on, I don't think anybody knew what was going to happen. I think, like Tim, we were 100% in studio remotely in our 3 locations, working with each other. So we had some experience working cross-site and working over video. But, you know, in the space of, you know, under 2 weeks, we got all of our staff globally working from home, and with no view on how long we were going to be, you know, planning for this for. And I was like, 3 months, maybe 6 months. And then here we are almost 2 years later, still responding. And, you know, I think it was an amazing experience being able to make, you know, both protect the futures of our staff and, you know, keep our industry going and continue to keep them employed, but ultimately allow them the bandwidth to focus on their families and focus on the safety and health of the entire world. It was, for animation, I think, a bit of an explosion of content. We were able to keep going. We were very resilient. And I think that, you know, that was fantastic for, you know, the majority of our staff. Both, you know, we were able to pick up crew that maybe had a bit of a slump in visual effects and come and join the teams and, you know, continue to develop their careers. But, you know, it's different working from home. You know, there is an isolation factor that you need to, you know, bring teams together a little bit more consciously. You know, it was a tough time for the entire world, and I think the mental health aspects and, you know, supporting our teams and making sure that they were able to respond to their family needs was a big challenge for us as a company, and trying to, you know, find that hybrid workforce moving forward so that there is that balance. You know, we were able to sort of grow our team by probably almost, you know, 30% during the course of 2020. And continue making our productions, a couple of new projects, you know, are starting up. So, you know, I think for animation, yes, we were very resilient. We were able to continue to grow and hopefully able to sort of keep some of that visual effects and that talent that maybe we're hitting that slump, sort of keep everybody employed and keep everybody moving forward.
Yeah, no, that's interesting that you say that you were able to pick up some folks working in visual effects while that slump happened. So I'll maybe hand it over to Jeff to just explain a little bit more about that and how VFX ultimately fared throughout the pandemic and how it might evolve as a result.
Sure. Yeah. I think for us, we had two big problems. One was that productions had shut down because they hadn't at that time figured out how to shoot films within pandemic conditions. And then number two was the theaters were closed. So we had both no incoming work and no place to display our work. I think, like Sharon, we pivoted. Certainly, we're working on 2 animated features within the Vancouver studio, which is great because that gives you that continuity of work through those slower times. But we also found that the slowdown was relatively light impact because we had enough work in the pipeline that we still had to finish all of that work. And then productions were able to ramp back up and kind of figure out how to shoot in pandemic conditions. And in fact, if anything, it almost added more work to our plate because all of a sudden a ballroom scene that needed to be created couldn't be shot with the actors and all the background. It all had to be done separately, and we composited it all together. So in an odd way, it's added even more work. And then while theaters had slowed down at the time, it was almost exactly timed when so many streaming services were taking off. And so all of them had a need to fill that sort of weekly content churn and make sure that that feed was, had new shows in it to watch as they competed for subscribers. So that ended up being, I think, very good for the visual effects industry to kind of weather the worst of the pandemic. Now productions, through testing, have figured out how to shoot under these conditions, and we still are helping with elements of the shoots, crowds and things like that they would have just done in camera before. I think the biggest change for us, just like Sharon had said, was the switch to work from home. It happened so rapidly. It seemed very short term, and now it's fundamentally changed the industry. And I think in many, many positive ways that will want to continue even as we are able to go back into the office. I know for me personally, I've spent, more time with the family than my 20 years in this industry. So I'm very appreciative of the flexibility it offers. But at the same time, I see the struggle with not being able to have, be in an office, especially for all the folks that are new, coming up to speed on all the tools and pipeline. And just those, you're missing those casual conversations that happen where some of the best ideas happen. So like Tim, we've sort of revamped our studio, kind of gearing it to a hybrid type approach, and are looking forward to having a space where people can come and still have that exchange of ideas, but still enabling that work from home, which I think Tim mentioned, also I think opens the door to people that maybe aren't located in the Lower Mainland to be part of this industry, which I think can open a lot of great doors.
Cool. And you mentioned that ballroom scene and the creative way that needed to be effectively produced. One thing that I kind of wanted to ask you about, which you sort of alluded to a little bit in a previous conversation we had, are kind of new developments that might happen within visual effects as a result of the pandemic, or even just as a result of just better technology over the years. One of them that sounds really cool are the virtual sets. Are those going to do away with green screens for good, or really what's some really cool stuff that's happening in visual effects that viewers can look forward to?
I hope so. I think green screens will be with us forever to a degree, but it really is pretty spectacular. And there's a lot of material online in terms of these virtual production stages that facilities are building to enable visual effects. And it's really cool to see, but there's nothing like being there in person and understanding how much this feels like it's changing the landscape of filmmaking and what it's enabling us to do now in these creative projects. All of a sudden, productions are able to work inside and shoot in the sunset all day long. Or they're able to visit multiple locations throughout the entire day without traveling a crew all over the world. So I think it's opened up a lot of possibilities for filmmakers because their backgrounds are generated with these real-time engines. At the same time, I think it's opened up a lot of avenues for artists. We're still looking for traditional visual effects artists, but we're also recruiting artists that specialize in game engines and real-time engines that understand, how to build photoreal content for these, to go onto these LED walls behind the actors. I think if nothing else, the whole thing was built just so that we could get away from that sense that you have when you watch shows where it's like those people aren't there. Yeah, they don't look like they're there at all because the lighting's wrong. And this all of a sudden is like a whole new world where they look perfectly integrated. There's no composite to extract. And I think most excitingly for the artists, it's really integrated them into the production process. So we used to be very much like shoot the film, okay, hand it to us, and we do our work after. Now all of that's been shifted forward, and our artists are very directly involved in the shooting of these films, and they are creating content that is going up on these LED walls that is being shot. So there's nothing in between them and what's in the show, which I think is really exciting for artists.
Awesome. No, that sounds really good. I mean, in the study, we highlighted about 60 unique occupation across the sectors, but sounds like we might be seeing many more in the near future as well with some of these developments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're definitely shifting from just traditional visual effects roles into lots of virtual production and sort of real-time artist roles being available.
Awesome. All right, Locke, now I'll take it back over to you. So when we partnered on this study, part of the objective was absolutely to highlight the sector a little bit more, to define it, so to speak, and really paint a good picture of what this looks like in BC and why it's important. But the other part of the study was actually to use it to drive change. So you mentioned several key recommendations that the report came out with, many that involve collaboration across the industry, across various stakeholders within the ecosystem. So I'll give you an opportunity here to just talk about how DigiBC is working with industry and other players in the ecosystem to help push some of those recommendations forward.
Thanks, Lexi. Yeah, so coming out of that first recommendation around equity, diversity, and inclusion, and the second one around education and talent pipeline, we've been working across the sector with our member companies. So since in the last few months, we've formed both an education steering committee that's composed of members from our companies. Jeff and Tim actually are on that committee. And we've also just formed an EDI committee at DigiBC as well. And with that, we're working on both an education strategy and an EDI strategy, EDI for equity, diversity, and inclusion. Tyler, if you're able to share my screen again, great. It's great. If not, I can just talk through them. But here's, yeah, please go ahead and share if you want. We've been working, DigiBC's worked on a few initiatives over the years that I want to highlight, and some that we're working on now. So in our EDI strategy, we have our continued education efforts, such as the Play to Learn program that's part of the math curriculum for BC. It's a program that lets kids in middle school learn how to code a game. And similar to that, DigiCamp, which we started this year, is the first of several camps for underrepresented youth. And with these programs, we're starting, at middle school, where kids are before they face a lot of the systematic challenges and barriers that happen through high school to develop skills and build confidence. We are also working with both Women in Games and Women in Animation to support events around supporting women who work in creative technology right now. And then behind the scenes, we're doing some work with our companies, with partners like HR Tech Group, who have developed great toolkits to answer one of the questions in the chat around how we can legally and provide best practices for collecting data around underrepresented groups in our members' companies. So that's some of the highlights of our EDI strategy that we've just started working on. Lots more to do, but I think it's a great start, and our member companies and the sector have been really supportive, and the provincial government is also very receptive to this. So.
Excellent. Thanks, Locke. And kind of a related question is really about how you see the sector evolving going forward in BC. And what I mean by that is that although BC is the birthplace of Canadian creative tech, and there's really a lot to be said about that and how it's evolved, a couple of other jurisdictions, both in Canada and internationally, certainly came up in our study as key competitors to BC, both in terms of just work and talent as well. So in your opinion, what could BC do to ensure that it stays competitive globally going forward and continues to be a place that attracts a lot of investment and top talent?
Yeah, thanks, Lexi. Our focus on education and the education strategy, I think, is a huge part of it. And so coming out of this, the benchmark study, we've had a great relationship working with the provincial government and having discussions around what's needed, what needs to change in the education system, what opportunities can we provide. So most recently, the government has issued something called the micro-credential framework and funding around that, which our sector and our steering committee was able to feedback on. And as a result of that, we've developed new partnerships with all 6 of the largest universities and colleges in BC towards developing creative technology micro-credentials. So we're working on something really unique that is part of our bigger education strategy that we'll be able to share more of later. But when we combine that with work integrated learning, I think we're going to create something that isn't done in other places, and that's going to really address the gaps that our companies see, the skills gaps when people come in. It's going to address how to support people from underrepresented groups once they start working in our companies and providing mentorship networks. And it's also going to produce more talent that our companies need so that they can grow and scale. And in addition to that, we are working with the provincial government on our end, more specifically on the interactive digital media tax credit. So we're working with the province on a couple of ideas around, on top of renewing it when it comes up in 2023. But we've been discussing how can we support remote workers and work from home better? Can we provide an incentive for that so that our companies receive an additional tax credit if we can hire people remotely from BC? And then the we're also talking about if we hire from underrepresented groups in BC, can we get an additional incentive for that? So those discussions are going well and continue. So I'm hoping that with targeted incentives like that we'll be able to leverage the entire province and really grow the creative tech sector, more than having companies in Vancouver and Victoria.
Awesome. I really like the emphasis on kind of building that more junior talent pipeline. And one of the things you mentioned is a focus on work integrated learning. And I really can't stress how important this is, not just for creative tech, but it's really come up across all of our research that it's a key factor for young people entering or starting their jobs these days. In fact, in creative tech, our study found that pretty much hands down, employers felt that students that have that work integrated learning background were more likely to be successful. And as you saw from Locke's slides earlier, there's a really high conversion rate of people coming in as will placements to those that become full-time hires. So for any young people that might be listening today or parents, I think just tons of opportunity to make sure that your kids can participate in this sector. Okay, and the last question that I have for you guys today. Well, at the start of this panel, I did ask you a bit of a personal question in terms of how you ended up in the sector, what your journey looked like. And I guess now I'll ask you another sort of personal question, really, is there's tons of opportunity that we've seen in BC creative tech, and it's a really unique sector that does blend technology and art, which I think can be appealing to many different people from different backgrounds and different educational streams. So just, quickly, your opinion, if a young person asked you today, how can I get into this sector? What do I need to do? What advice would you give them? And we'll start with you, Sharon.
Oh, just one piece of advice. I think it's be brave, and I will add some more. Be brave, be yourself, and be prepared to be part of a team. I think that's part of the reason why that work integrated learning is so successful. Is a lot of your schooling and a lot of education is about what you achieve individually. And when you come into industry, realizing that there might be 300 other people working on a film with you, and that you're a piece of that, and you have to give your work with others to achieve that overall production. It can be a little bit disorientating for people coming in. So be prepared to be part of that team and be yourself, and just have fun.
Awesome. What about you, Jeff? What are your thoughts here?
Very similar. Like if you love this work, you're really going to have no problem getting into and succeeding in the industry, because it's just full of so many passionate and amazing people. I would say, like, a lot of people, especially for film and visual effects, like, tend to be very focused on what project they're doing. That's great. Like, you want to pursue your passions, but I have had some of the most fun working on the worst films. And it is much more about the people that you're working with that make this this so enjoyable. And then I think the other thing is just not to get discouraged. Like, there's so many resources out there now where you can dabble on your own, start to learn more about how we do this work, and just kind of figure out like what interests you. And then when you do get ready to apply, don't get discouraged. I got rejected from ILM multiple times, and you just keep running at it, keep improving your work, and you'll definitely find success here.
So I guess persistence is key. Multiple times, yet you've been there for 20 years. So that whatever time that was, that last one, it definitely made an impact. Awesome. Great to hear. And Tim, what are your thoughts on advice you would give to a young person wanting to get into video games?
Yeah, I think that was great advice from Sharon and Jeff. You know, with those micro-credential courses, camps, online courses and tutorials, you know, my advice would be start by doing and build your body of work along the way. A lot of people have excuses for you know, why they can't start, and then they just never do. You know, I think there's a great quote from Bill Gates that said, most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. And so, you know, don't wait for those perfect conditions for everything to kind of line up and work out. I think you'll surprise yourself by what you could accomplish if you just try. And then even now, you know, echoing, you know, what I said at the beginning, we're looking at Web3, NFTs, earn to play. There's so many new kind of subsectors, I think, that are rising just within the gaming industry. And people don't have any experience with any of that. So if you're coming in, you're kind of at the same playing field as everyone else. And so you have really nothing to lose. And I think Jeff said this before, and Sharon said it as well, you know, you're just learn, and you're going to have fun along the way.
Awesome. I like that. This kind of level playing field with some of these new innovations within creative tech. Great. And for any folks that might be listening online and interested, whether from industry or if you have a child that's interested in creative tech, ICTC did recently partner with the government of BC on work integrated learning under the Innovator Skills Program. So yeah, definitely check that out. There's a pretty substantial wage subsidy for industry that hires work integrated learning students, and definitely lots of opportunity that way for both companies and students interested in the sector. Are there any last comments or anything that any of the panelists want to say before we head into the questions? I do see that there are several in the chat box here, but I'll open it up for any final words. No? Okay. In that case, then, we'll go to our first question from Edward. And this question is, can creative tech be used to teach K-12 students basic programming, UI, UX, and other digital skills needed to make cool video games? So maybe we'll have Tim take a first shot at that one.
I mean, sure. Yeah, you know, definitely. You know, I think video games animation, like that's a great gateway into tech itself, right? Because it's we're looking at individuals that are working closely with the products themselves, so they really understand them from that level. So I would say yes.
Okay, and maybe not specifically related to video games. Is there something, Jeff or Sharon, that you think visual effects or animation can do or is doing within that K-12 space to help build those foundational skills?
Yeah, I think a lot of our companies in our industry have various programs to connect. Animalogic has a work experience program, which was a little bit put on hold during the pandemic. But engage with companies, engage with people in the industry, ask a lot of questions. And that's all I've done my whole career, is ask other people questions. And just be curious. The more that you start to understand, the more you sort of form a view on not only how the industry works and different types of roles, but where you find something that excites you. We have so many different roles across everything from HR, front of house, through to the most technical and creative roles. And I can't imagine that anybody can't find a role within our industry that actually suits them and is something that excites them. So just be curious, and yeah, you'll learn, continue to learn.
I couldn't agree more. And I think we actually have an amazing advantage in this industry, in that we have pop culture to sell what we do to that K-12 space. And, when you go in and you talk about like, oh, this is how we made Davy Jones for Pirates. And after everybody asks if we got to meet Johnny Depp, usually the next thing they want to know is like, how did you make this? And when they can see that the math and science that they're learning in school now are exactly the tools that we use to create all these characters, I think it kind of builds a connection where they can see that it's like, oh, it's not so far above my level. Like these concepts that I'm learning now here in K-12 are completely applicable in this industry.
I love that. Yeah, I would definitely echo that about pop culture. And you mentioned earlier in this panel watching Reboot, and that was definitely something I did as well growing up. So it's really cool to kind of make that connection between what young people might be interested in and how the sector actually works. And Locke, maybe I'll just have you provide your thoughts as well. I know Digi's doing quite a lot in terms of that educational aspect, but yeah, wondering if there's anything from that K-12 level specifically that you want to highlight.
Our Play to Learn program has been available to over 85 schools in BC for the last 3 years, and we're hoping to have it continue. So that is a great way where you're using interactive software to learn to create create a video game, but it really applies to the creative technology process, right? And the other point I wanted to add was when I was running the NFB Digital Studio, the National Film Board's experimental interactive documentary studio, we often focused on the ideas first, and then we tackled the technical challenge to deliver on the idea after, right? And I think that's something that making it fun and playful like that has worked well in education for younger groups as well. Helping them to develop that creativity, and then the technical, the tech comes quite easily when you're on a mission, right? And you need to animate that figure or create that interactive interaction, right? And case in point was our DigiCamps this summer. The kids were 9 to 13, never programmed a video game before, and came out of it learning Python. And making a video game online, right? So in 1 week. So that was completely doable.
Awesome, thank you. Our second question today comes from Fawn, and this question is, in creating a representative team, how do you respectfully collect demographic data, and is it aggregated or disaggregated? So I'll let anybody take a shot at that question.
I will say I think that's part of the challenge. The collection of data is a personal decision for a lot of us. and companies need to respect the desire for people to or not to disclose. I think this is where the data collection needs to be developed in a way that is respectful of that, but also encourages that and, you know, makes everybody feel comfortable about what that data is going to be used for. You know, society and humanity doesn't have the best history in relation to the collection of that data, and now it's our responsibility to change that and help work with, you know, policymakers and industry and partners such as the HR Tech Group to provide that safe collection of data and, you know, respect our team members' decision as to how they want to respond to that. It is always, I can't say it is always within Animalogy, it is always collected anonymously when possible and only ever reported in aggregate.
Great. Yeah, I definitely think that trust factor of working with trusted organizations and making it clear what that data is used for or will be used for is critical. It definitely, even of course in our study, a lot of studios didn't really know what representation looked like for some underrepresented groups. So of course we want to do better. We want to move the needle, but we do need to understand where we currently are. And it's definitely not an easy one.
One thing that is much easier to measure, I think, is that representation within leadership. And, you know, as we're out there with all of these programs trying to diversify the workforce, if people come into the studio and don't see leadership that looks like them, then I think that discourages them from wanting to stay. So I think it's very easy for us to look at our leadership teams and try and focus on making sure that while we're bringing in new talent, we're also trying to make changes within the leadership team so that we have that diversity.
And just to add on to what Sharon was saying, this is exactly what our partnership with HR Tech Group is aiming to tackle: is how do we implement the proper processes and toolkits? How do we provide access to them to our companies? Because we have HR Tech Group did a project with the province where they have developed a toolkit that's been legally cleared that other companies have used. And then, yeah, on top of that, how do we set out to build, how to aggregate and anonymize the data so that we can use it for good, and while protecting the identity of the people that self-identify. And having done this at the National Film Board a few years back, I saw it implemented fairly well. You know, under the more extreme privacy guidelines of government, but it worked quite well in terms of applying it to a production environment. So it is possible to do.
Great. All right. A third question that we have comes from Tanya, and that is there a means for young people without a formal visual effects education to enter into the ecosystem? For example, what if they just have a high school diploma, but they have very strong applied skills? So visual effects, I'll hand this over to you, Jeff.
Sure. I mean, what's great now is that artists not only have the ability to learn and develop on their own, but also to publish their work. Most of our recruiting now is walking through ArtStation and finding talented artists out there. And you know, there's enough free software that gives you exposure to all the different parts of the pipeline that we use in ways that are very similar to how we work, that you can really learn a lot and do a lot on your own just to get those fundamentals in place. And for us, you know, if we see those fundamentals and the passion for the work, even if it's not, you know, at the level that would go in a feature film, that's okay. You know, we look for that passion, and then we want the interview to see, you know, are you a good communicator? And are you ready to work on a team, as Sharon mentioned, because that's so important to us. So I really think like there's so many avenues now for people to be able to publish their work and get it seen.
Cool. Yeah. And one of the things that we saw in the study actually were that a lot of representatives from the studios did say, well, you don't really need necessarily a formal education background to get into the space. There's many different opportunities. What about you, Tim or Sharon? Anything to kind of add about that for your sectors?
Yeah, I mean, like the online portfolio is so important. Whether you have that post-secondary education or not, it's really what makes you stand out. To employers when they can actually see the work that you've created. So, getting back to that doing, get out there and create and try new things and build up that work, because then you have something to kind of show off, right?
And I just echo that it's, for us, it's portfolio driven hiring, and, having the right fit to sort of come into that team environment. As somebody myself with no post-secondary education, it's possible. It's a lot of self-education along the way. And, I would recommend finding somebody who works in the industry and helping them guide you, so that you are aware of the areas where you do need to develop. And make those your focus areas to come into the industry, because without an educator helping to expose all of that to you, find your own mentor, and again, just continue to work on your art, work on your coding, work on whatever it is that is your passion, and publish as much as you can.
Excellent, thank you. We have another question from Tanya, and she asks, she's curious if work from home or remote working impacts or challenges more significantly women in the industry. So is that making it easier for them to enter, more difficult, or anything that you might have noticed from this period?
Probably both. Again, not everybody is the same. And I think it, in some ways it depends on the project and organization that you work for. We have found that the work from home has created a lot of flexibility for people with families to be able to just balance the schedule throughout the day. Homeschooling was, I think for any parent was a challenge. I think regardless of work from home or working, I think it was just a challenge. And we tried to make, if you need to school your kids, that's fine. People were able to work and do what they needed to when they needed to, without the commute, without all of the meeting schedules and things like that. Creating that flexibility, I think, has really helped. I think work from home, it became very isolating for some people. And so that's where I think for some people it works. I think now the company's creating that hybrid model where it will become a balance across coming in and working from home, I think is really going to help open up the pathways for a lot of women to find that balance, both for family life and, what needs to happen outside of the workplace.
Excellent. Thanks, Sharon. Okay, and I think we have time for one more question. There's a couple more on here, so I'm happy to distribute them to the panelists if that's of interest. But the last question is kind of an interesting one, and it asks, what are the competitive advantages of BC's creative tech industry for attracting business, investment, talent compared to other places? So our study highlighted many other places that are doing well in creative tech, a couple of them in Canada, for example, like Montreal, or the US internationally. What sets BC apart?
Talent. I think, in BC, we have some of the world's best talent working locally in that industry. It was the reason why Animal Logic opened there back in 2015. When we were looking for our North American presence outside of LA, it was pretty much we're going to Vancouver and BC. The proximity to our partners in Los Angeles, of course, helped, but there is an incredible talent pool and an incredible just industry coming together, to help improve and continue to sort of push the industry forward. And it's pretty special.
Yeah, I would agree. I think talent is such a huge part of it. Being on the West Coast, being able to respond very directly to clients, all is a huge part of it. Having such a good system of public and private education here that is focused on developing artists for the industry. And then having lived through a Montreal winter, I think the living here is pretty awesome.
Fair enough. Locke or Tim, anything you want to add to that?
Go ahead, Tim.
Go ahead, Locke.
I think everything was really well covered. I think pedigree is one. So much, such a great, rich history in the industry has built up a lot of great senior talent that can continue to pass that down. And then from the other end, the talent pipeline is just really strong.
I think, again, I completely agree. I think the only additional perspective I would add is we've mapped over the years in the video games industry how a lot of new companies are formed from senior talent that have been, at our largest game companies here, and then they spawn off new companies, so that it's part of an additional cycle that works in parallel to the talent pool, and
Awesome. There is actually one follow-up question on the talent piece, since pretty much all of you mentioned it. Tanya asks, why do we have a strong talent pool? So what sets them apart from other talent pools in top jurisdictions? If you know, or can answer that.
I think experience is definitely a big part of it. Like as much as we're trying to cultivate new talent, you need to have those reliable, experienced artists that know how to solve the really difficult problems. And I know ILM in particular has been here since 2012, so that's 10 years of experience on projects. And then also having so many different companies within BC, I think is a real strength, because people move from facility to facility and they pick up and acquire new skills. So the fact that it isn't just one company here, but multiple industries and multiple companies is a big part of why that talent pool is so strong.
I might just add that, the government policies that were developed, many years ago to help build and grow that industry, and that partnership between industry and the province to commit to attracting businesses, but also attracting educators and building educational programs to support the industry, has meant that there's this, in the infancy of the industry, there was a lot of local talent. We're able to attract a lot of international talent and, some of the best in the world to come, who have made BC their home now. And they're sort of helping to kind of spur that next generation. And so, that long-term strategy has paid off.
I think being on the West Coast, there's just a lot of diversity here as well, right? So, when you have diversity, you have different points of view, you have different ideas. And when you're talking about, creative industry, and you can bring together, different perspective, that's a really good ingredient into creating, awesome end results.
Excellent. All really great points. We are coming to the end of this panel, though. There are a couple more questions, but as I mentioned, I'll forward them on to the panelists. I really want to thank you guys for joining me today and having this really interesting conversation about what is a really cool sector with a lot of opportunity in the province. So thank you very much, panelists, and thank you to the audience for watching. And now I'll just hand it back to Tyler, who will close us up for the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Locke, Sharon, Tim, Jeff, you all made the West Coast sound like a fantastic place to be if you're definitely in the creative sector. As anyone can see from the time of day change on my side, I am a bit further east in Canada. But I want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us today. If you want to look up the report that was discussed today, you can find it on DigiBC's site, ICTC's site, or look it up on Medium. It's called Benchmarking the Creative Technology Ecosystem in British Columbia. I'll also toss a link in the chat here in just a moment. And before you go, if this type of chat interested you, I just want to let you know ICTC is holding a Digital Future Summit for the digital economy on February 1st and 2nd of 2022. We'd love for you to join us there. And if you're looking for more information and this type of chat kind of interests you, there's the URL is being displayed now. You can find it at horizon.ictc-ctic.ca. We'll follow up with any answers to the questions that weren't addressed. If you sign up to the event through our event page, you'll receive an email from us. If you want to visit this event afterwards or come back or share it, after this event's done, the same link that brought you here today is where you can replay it. Once again, thanks to all our panelists for joining us today, our moderator and Chief Research Officer Alexandra Cutin for leading the discussion, and thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.